Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking all about balancing discipline with the love and aftercare that comes after it.
But before we get to that, we want to make sure that you are hitting that like button if you're enjoying our content, so that way we are informed about that. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, because every time you hit the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
And if you want to help support the podcast, help us continue to do what we do here, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. With your Patreon membership, you get access to bonus content and our members-only Discord server. So if any of that is interesting to you, go ahead and check out the link down below.
So it's either been a while since we've talked about this, or I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast. I can't remember.
A long time ago, when we first started the podcast, I think it was one of our first 5 topics. We did do an episode about aftercare.
Okay.
But I feel like our views on aftercare have evolved quite a bit.
Definitely.
The way we approach aftercare in our own relationship has evolved quite a bit. And so it's time for kind of an update of our take on the topic of aftercare versus discipline and how that all kind of works together.
Yeah, and so for everybody who doesn't know what aftercare is, because I know when we first started, I was like, what does that even mean? I'm not even sure what that term means.
So I will be the first to admit that I don't love the term aftercare. I don't like the word, especially in a domestic discipline context, because I know that when we first started the podcast, I was coming from a perspective of having a lot of knowledge and kind of like research into more of the BDSM side of dominance and submission and discipline and all of those things, and really that never really fit our relationship.
No, it really didn't.
And so when we discovered domestic discipline, this was such a natural fit. But because I have that kind of history of like researching and kind of deep diving into the subject of BDSM, aftercare really is a term that is more specific to that world, to kind of that side of things, where in domestic discipline we still use the word aftercare, but I don't love it, because really what aftercare is in domestic discipline, especially relationship-based domestic discipline, it's reconciliation. So I prefer to call it reconciliation, because that really is the energy that you want to bring into that time right after discipline, right after spanking. You really want to have reconciliation between you as a couple to reconnect, build each other up, to build the relationship up, so that you can move forward with having the discipline not only be effective, but also be a positive experience.
I will tell you, as a head of household, this is something that I kind of underestimated, because, head of households, we sometimes don't realize the importance of reconnecting with our taken in hands. And it's something that we don't mean to, but we kind of dismiss. We kind of think, oh, okay, well, that and we dismiss it from the standpoint, not that we don't necessarily do it, but I remember it was something that I kind of was like, okay, this needs to be a quick thing. And I realized how really important it is to, like you said, bring the reconciliation to the relationship, but how important it is that whole process to really get things back on track.
It really is, and it can be quick, but most of the time it takes a few minutes.
Yes, right.
It takes a little while to kind of get back to that place, and I think that it's important not to rush that process, because you want to make sure that you are not trying to rush through that process, that you're not leaving right away. I know that sometimes schedules just don't align and you have to kind of have that on a time frame, but that's why we prefer to do our discipline, especially, punishments, we prefer to do that at the end of the day, where we're not rushing to the next thing, if possible. I mean, sometimes it's not possible,
Right.
but we really like to give ourselves that time, because it can take time.
In speaking about this too, I think you would probably say too, it differs on the taken in hand, and also it depends on what has happened, what has transpired. Have you done a correction? Have you done a punishment? Was it an extended punishment? All of those things are going to factor into also how long aftercare it may take.
Well, and the nature of the offense, right?
Right.
There's a big difference between I made a mistake in not completing a habit or not fulfilling something on my task list or a schedule, something within my schedule, versus I said something disrespectful.
Right.
I offended you and created division in the relationship.
Right.
There's a big difference there. And so aftercare after an offense or after division will probably take longer than I didn't complete a task.
Right.
And so there is a difference in just, there's so many factors that play into it.
Right.
Really is what that
Right.
comes down to. And so you really do have to find aftercare that fits your relationship. You have to find what really brings that reconciliation and what is meaningful to you as a couple.
And head of households, what I want to encourage you to do in this process is this may be something that, again, we talk a lot about on here about communication and having conversations. You need to talk with your taken in hand to really find what is going to help her come around and to have that, it's kind of the cherry on top, if you will, for this whole thing. And so what is it that she needs in order to really get her feet settled again and ready to move forward after you've had a correction or a punishment like that? Don't just assume that because you know her really well, that you know exactly what she needs and the time that she needs that to occur. Really have some heartfelt conversations about that on what she needs and really, don't say, well, you said you only need 10 minutes, and you write that down after 10 minutes, you're done. But ask her really what the time frame for her kind of looks like and feels like, so you have a little bit of an idea of really how you can meet that need there.
Mm-hmm. Especially in the beginning, it's really important to have those conversations. But over time, hopefully you start to be able to kind of read her body language,
Yes.
read her mood, so that you can kind of feel it out. Now, I know that our punishment systems, our correction systems, all of that is very standardized.
Mm-hmm.
It is very meticulous. It's very planned. That's not going to work for everyone. And in fact, we've gotten some feedback that it feels a little methodical, but that works really well for us. It doesn't detract from the process for either one of us.
Not at all.
But this time of reconciliation afterwards, that is very unstructured. We do not have a standard of what that looks like, the time frame, the process. Nothing is standardized as far as that is concerned. It really is what we both need, in particular what I need in those moments. Now, I think that it is important to acknowledge that this time of reconciliation, this aftercare, it is not one-sided. It is not just the taken in hand that needs that. It really is for both of you. And there might be some things that the head of household needs in particular from that time in order to find resolve within himself.
That's true. And I think I underestimated that as well, that I just thought, this is a kind of a one-sided thing. And I didn't realize that the aftercare really helps me process also what just happened, but also to process about, okay, how do I really get that connection back with her so that when we finish, we do in fact move forward. Because we talked about on this podcast before that even during the spanking, I'm going through my own process, and I think every head of household goes through their own process. It is the same with aftercare, and you can really you really don't underestimate how important that is, even for you head of households, to really help get your relationship solidified again.
So one thing that I wanted to bring up is that aftercare or reconciliation, whatever you want to call it, it really should not be two things. It should not be an extension of the punishment. It really is a time to regain that connection, regain the positive energy of your relationship, you rebuild, because when you go through punishment as a taken in hand, there is a sense of, I did something wrong. I've been lectured. I've been spanked. I've been punished. And there is kind of a tearing down of that behavior, rightfully so, because you do want to tear down the behaviors that are not beneficial to your relationship. And so you go through this process and now you have to rebuild. You have to rebuild in a positive way. You have to encourage. You have to come together. And so you can't do something in your aftercare that would continue the tearing down process. to continue that like punishment process, you really do have to find what is going to bring resolve, connection, reconciliation, and tailor your reconciliation around that.
This is something that I guarantee you I did not understand, I don't think, in the beginning. In fact, when we would do that, you're absolutely right. It almost was an extension of our punishment. I think it almost became, I think at first, to be fair, it was almost a second lecture. And that definitely did not serve us very well.
Now, I will say that in a episode that I did about lectures, what I get from lectures as taken in hand, I did mention that you do kind of extend that lecture into the reconciliation process, but it has a different kind of connotation.
That's true, right.
It has a different kind of like feel to it, because your lecture goes from this is unacceptable, which is what happens in the beginning,
right,
to afterwards you say this is what I expect from you.
Right.
And so it definitely is like, and it has a different tone to it. Your body language is different. And so it really is rebuilding and setting the expectation in a positive way. And so you can kind of extend that lecture into the reconciliation. You just have to be really careful how you do it.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of it more of, like you were saying, when I first did it, the lecture was still stern. It was still as though you were paying penance, versus what you were just saying, where now the lecture is more of, hey, going forward, this is what I expect from you. I know that you can do this. It's more of like positive reinforcement at that point, rather than, I remember it was still kind of finger pointing, for lack of a better term there.
And so whether you use an extension of the lecture or corner time or any type of kind of more like formal kind of aspects to your reconciliation, you want to make sure that they are not becoming an extension of the punishment unintentionally. Now, if you intend to extend the punishment and the punishment's not over with the spanking, then that's definitely a choice that you can make, and that's something that you can go into knowing. But you have to know that that's your intention, because if your intention is the punishment's over when the spanking ends, then you want to be really careful that whatever you're using during your reconciliation is working towards the goal of building up and finding resolve and moving forward in a positive way. Absolutely.
And I really think that one of the things that you have a tendency to do if you don't have that communication that we talked about how things are going to go, this is going to confuse your taking in hand. And what you're going to find out is the reconciliation process goes from being just that into, oh, we didn't resolve anything. And so you really need to have that thought out, and you need to have the conversations about it before you, in other words, one of the things that we're trying to say is don't just have a punishment and then say, oh, we're going to kind of go about the reconciliation process just by feel. We're just going to kind of do that. You still want to try to have it planned out. Maybe not as meticulous as you would some of the other things that we do, but you still need to plan it just a little bit, because otherwise you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants.
Now, the other thing that this time of reconciliation or aftercare really should not be is it should not be a form of reward.
Good point.
You do not want to withhold certain things from your taken in hand and only use them during aftercare, because then it almost becomes a reward that you only receive after a spanking. And you don't want to create that kind of connotation between punishment and a payout. You really want this to rebuild the relationship, bring resolve, bring closeness, but you don't want to only have that level of closeness right after a spanking. You don't want to only have that type of interaction right after a spanking.
So I think I know what you might be getting at here just a little bit, but what do you think that could be for a lot of different taken in hands?
I think that sometimes that one-on-one attention, that undivided attention from your head of household, sometimes that can unintentionally become kind of a payout of the punishment process. And I have seen through the couples that I've interacted with in the past that I've seen some couples go through this cycle where the head of household just isn't paying attention, so the taken in hand starts to act out and starts to kind of do things intentionally to earn the punishment so that they can have that reconciliation afterwards, so that they can have that like undivided attention from their head of household, and then it becomes a toxic cycle. That's not good for your relationship. That's not going to be effective discipline. It's not going to be effective just for building up your relationship. So you really need to be careful that you're not creating a reward system within the punishment process.
Well, that's a really good thing to bring up, because boy, that opens up a whole nother can of worms about what could be potentially wrong in the relationship, right? If especially head of households, if you're using that as a way to for them to again get the affection that they need, and you're kind of withholding it for that. That could be why you're taking in hand if she's getting in trouble a lot lately. That could be the reason. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point that you bring up, that you want to make sure that you're really paying attention, that you're not withholding the things that you're taking in hand really needs, because that does, in fact, lead to the bad behavior sometimes, because you're wanting that. And to a certain extent, that's understandable.
And another thing that I feel like could be either or an extension of punishment and also potentially a reward system is a lot of couples will use sexual closeness as aftercare, and you don't necessarily want to have that be the only time you ever engage in that way, because it could go either way for your taken in hand, that either they feel compelled to do these things because they've just been punished and they're in this really submissive headspace, and afterwards they could feel like that was an extension of the punishment, that was something that they were expected to do, that it didn't really fulfill them or build up the relationship. Or on the flip side, if that's the only time you're engaging in that way, it could feel like that's a reward of the punishment, is that you get this type of intimacy and closeness. So you really want to be careful not to withhold affection, either physical affection or just the mental and emotional connection. You don't want to withhold that in other areas of your relationship, so you don't start to kind of create a benefit to punishment in that way.
I will tell you, this is something I know that you will definitely probably agree with this, that I really struggled with, because as we talked about on the podcast before, you're somebody that very much responds to physical touch. And this was something I actually, and this is why head of household, it's so important for you to kind of take an inventory of this. I didn't even realize that I was withholding this from Aria. It wasn't intentional, but I realized that the only times that I would hug her, the only times that I would be gentle in my touch and affectionate towards her in that way, was kind of in that reconciliation process. And that was something that I had to go, wow, I need to do a better job of that. And that's where I think you didn't even realize that you were having some resentments, like they wasn't conscious, but that kind of came about because of that.
It definitely did not build up our relationship. It definitely started to wane after a while that was the case. And so we did talk through it, and we came to a better place with that.
Yeah.
I want to be very careful to say that nothing we have discussed, whether we're talking about extending the punishment or creating an unintentional reward system within your reconciliation, nothing we've talked about, no singular activity or act, is a bad thing to do. You just want to make sure that you're doing it with the right intention, and that it is actually accomplishing what you need to accomplish with your reconciliation process.
Yes.
So if corner time does fit into that process for you, that's great. You just need to be intentional to make sure that that's what's actually happening. If having sexual intimacy fits into that process for you as a couple, that's great. You just need to make sure that you are being intentional with that. And so none of these things are right or wrong. It really is what builds you up as a couple, what brings closeness to you as a couple, because you really do need to understand that there is a very stark contrast between the harshness of discipline. You go into discipline having done something wrong, having distance in the relationship, having a divide between you as a couple. You get that stern lecture. We've talked about how important it is to have the right body language and the right tone in your lecture so that it communicates that there was a wrong committed here. And then discipline itself, in order to be effective, it has to be what most people would consider harsh. You know, it has to hurt. It has to have a tone of, you know, this is kind of your pittance to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
And so the balance there is that the reconciliation process, all of that is gone. It really is about reflecting, turning to a new goal, going forward with a clean slate, and really reconnecting as a couple in order to have that closeness moving forward.
And head of households, you really want to work hard in this reconciliation process to really reassure your taken in hand that all has been made right, that the slate has been wiped clean, that you believe in them, that you know that they can do better going forward. Again, all the things that we were saying about you want them to understand that you know that they know what to expect from you and what you expect from them going forward. But again, that you, as Ari was just saying, that they realize that you are wiping the slate clean, that all has been made forgiven. You know, there's many times where we're in the reconciliation process, I'm holding Aria close and I tell her, all has been made right. You're forgiven. We're moving forward. This is a clean slate. I want you to let it go. All of those things are important and are a part of the process. And so work really hard to work in that process to get all of the ducks back in a row, if you will. It's almost like, again, you're hitting that reset button and you're just putting all of the things back in order again, putting everything back on the shelf to then move forward.
I think that is a good place to stop. Of course, just quickly want to touch on that because in our first kind of episode about aftercare, we touched a lot on the meeting the physical needs of yourselves, but in particular the taken in hand. So making sure that you have water, that you have Kleenex, that you are meeting the physical needs. I think that that's implied now.
Absolutely.
I don't feel like we need to deep dive into that, but definitely don't overlook that as well, because that's happened to us a few times where, you know, we just weren't paying attention to that part. And then after aftercare, I was like, wow, I am really thirsty, or just just something like that. So just make sure that you have those things available, but I don't want to go too much into that because that's kind of an implied aspect of just knowing yourselves and knowing what you need and making sure that all of your needs are met. But really that reconciliation is more of an emotional process to set yourselves up for success moving forward in your relationship so that mistakes don't continue to be repeated.
Of course, if they want to hear more, we're going to continue this conversation over in our post show.
That's true. We will. Hope to see you there. Otherwise, we will talk to you next time.
See you later.